Hi, Winka. Thank you for joining us today. We're so happy that you're here at SCI-Arc. The first question has to do with the kind of projects that you do. You're both interested in the building components and the urbanscape. I was trying to think about it from the idea of the surface, that you work on the surface of the facade and the surface of the urbanscape. But I like the idea that it's not only about the surface that changes from skin to landscape, but it's about texture. The idea of texture really makes a dialogue happen somehow.
You know, it has probably to do with the fact that I'm from Holland, and in Holland we tend to always think about the city. And because Holland is so hyper-urbanized, it's almost impossible to think of anything that doesn't have to do with the city. And I guess being Dutch, you are trained to think that a building impacts the city and the city impacts the building. Surfaces have changed over the years drastically. So where it used to be all about deep textures just because of protection and safety reasons, now it's really because we feel that we can occupy these textures. One of the things that I always think is really important, that a building is kind of like really sees the ground plane almost as an in-between person, if you can call it that, or a third building.
You know, when you start to look at how you really were one of the pioneers in the 90s of rethinking, but also kind of engaging in the new ideas and the new technologies. I mean, it's a short history for the discipline of architecture, but it's a long history for an architect. Some people might call it already an archaeology, like Reglin starts to call the archaeology of the digital. Like, can we talk about the 90s as something that is archaeological?
Of course.
So what is the relevance today of that problem that you engage?
That's actually interesting. You know, you might remember we had at Penn, when I became chair, the first thing I did to make a point was to have this conference called The New Normal, totally based on that idea that after 20 years of digital design, you could not say new anymore. It's exhausting to hear the word new all the time, so archaeology sounds beautiful to me. And so that whole conference was like, what is this? You know, where do we go from here? Like, how do we keep moving forward? What are the most important things we should think of? And interesting things came up, like such as like really interesting hybrids of offices had started to emerge, like people who had an architecture office and then got into scripting or robotics, so became part of a huge innovative landscape that is a whole new landscape. And I think, you know, these are interesting moves away from where we were in the 90s. And I think that is part of that thinking. To come back to cities, I'm interested in cities, but not in urban design. The only way to tackle a city is to really see how you can find intrinsic points that can be either improved, accelerated, changed, or completely erased. Essentially come up with one, the smallest possible, or like whatever that exact point needed, and that is the only thing you do. So you cause growth around it. You don't actually master plan the city. Even for other, you know, existing cities, master plans are like just not the thing to do anymore. Our societies move too fast, and that's the beauty of it.
What is the role of an architect in designing cities? That it might not be that, you have urban designers and then you have an urban department. You created a program that is really kind of a foundation of a kind of a think tank. Those things are standard now. And then how you move beyond that.
When I was teaching, I always taught far future. Architecture is a super slow profession, and you know, where often we declare it's over, and the reality is the actual construction practice is still catching up. And then you have academics that is free of that and really is the only way to think about the future and to push the future forward. We have to train people to be ready for the next 25, even maybe 50 years. And that's the only way also to understand how cities or buildings could be impacted. I want students to be ready for a lot of the stuff they're going to hopefully develop. I'm a very long-term thinker. I don't actually get very hung up or frustrated about what's going on. And I have the same attitude as a chair. I really like to think that we all brainstorm on how we should be in the next 50 to 100 years.
I think that the way you're looking at it is like always think ahead of what you have. And it seems that it's true in other disciplines, no matter where you are. You're like 10 years later after you graduate from school. Looking at, again at your work now, I was looking at a lot of like photos of prototyping, like that is our version of futurism in a way.
Yeah.
Like prototyping, what does it mean? Prototyping means that you have to test it.
We tend to always say we don't believe in presentation models, we only believe in prototyping. And a lot of stuff you find out when you actually make the prototype. And I feel also in that sense you can really work much more in an interesting way with the people who make it.
If the model is true, if it's used as a kind of end product, it loses its feedback possibility.
Exactly.
You could do a prototype in a 3D and a kind of realistic render. The actual prototype has all of these other qualities that a render would not have.
I study sculpture, so I have this problem that I like to feel things and see things, and I can't think flat, so I have to do everything. That's probably why I've been always digital, because it was like my savior, away from a flat drawing that totally doesn't interest me. I personally like things that are close to ugly, have enormous amounts of character and identity. Even that folded glass building, you could really honestly also say it's pretty ugly, you know. And I don't care. What I liked about it was that when people started to move in and I lived there, was that they talked about the building like a pet. And I guess it meant for them that they had a building that stood out, and they liked that fact. You know, that was their thing. I like to think that projects are part of a larger research, and that these researches evolve.
What is the feedback between academics and practice? You would imagine that academics is the think tank, and then the office is where we test some stuff.
Having always been in academia and in practice, it's kind of almost hard to imagine how it would be if it wasn't that. I started working with MIT Media Lab when I was teaching in Harvard. Then we started talking about the practice, and then I worked with them on an installation we did in a gallery in New York. But it also happens the other way around. The project for Bogota, the client said, I would like to keep working on this. And I said, what about students? And I think we're very lucky that way, you know, that we have, first of all, these kind of two worlds we can hide from one to the other, but also that they inspire each other. And I have my own office, so for me, academics is also a great way to talk about architecture with peers.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you.